Heavenly Father, we want to ask that you will bless us this morning, that you will be our strength and redeemer in all things, to help us not to live in fear, Lord, but live in faith, in hope, in a confidence in a God that loves us, that protects us daily. Put a hedge of protection around your people, Lord. Help us, Lord, to be confident, not in the flesh, but in the spirit that lives within us. Forgive us for our shortcomings and weaknesses. Cover us with grace. Fill us with patience and wisdom and discernment. And help us to, Lord, to live a life that is uh, victorious in the sense that we live our lives for you. And let us be able to lift up Christ wherever we go and whatever we do, for we know that we have a God that truly loves us and will protect not just us, but our loved ones as well. And so these things we ask in Christ's name, and we give all praise, honor, and glory. Amen.
Okay, so we're picking up the Ten Commandments study again. We'll probably be doing that for a couple more weeks yet after this. So we'll start with a bit of a review of what we covered last week. And we were looking at the numbering of the Ten Commandments in particular. And we saw that in the Bible, when God gave the Ten Commandments, he said that there were 10 of them. And he also said that there were 2 tablets. But he didn't say how to number them, which was number 1, which was number 2. And people have had discussions about that and come up with different solutions to that. But a lot of those solutions have had problems. And some of them have been recognized by those people and changed. So the problem really is, at its foundation, is that when you look at those 10 commandments, you can see that there are 9 of them. They're kind of 9 do and do not commandments. And it's hard to find that 10th one. And the reason is, as we looked at last week, the 10th one doesn't look like that. It isn't a do or do not commandment. It's a different in style. So people, because they can only see those 9, they try to get 10 from it because God said that there were 10. And one way to get those 10 is to break the idolatry commandment into 2. And that's what the Catholics did. No, sorry, that's not what the Catholics did. They broke the covetousness. It's the Protestants who have broken, and other groups too, have broken the idolatry commandment into 2 pieces when it really shouldn't have been. And the Catholics, as I said, they broke the covetousness commandment into 2 pieces, and sometimes into 2 different pieces, depending on who you talk to. And so that's kind of been the fundamental problem, is that on a close, or not a close observation, it looks like there's only 9 of them. And so making 10 out of them result in breaking one of them. But going back to the oldest reference for a numbering system, going back to the Talmud before any others, they were the ones who understood it correctly, and that would be from the Jews. And they understood it in a different way and for a different reason. And that's kind of what we're digging into here, is why did they think that was the first commandment, and how does that make sense when you look at it as the first commandment? And so they recognize that one of those 10 commandments is not like the other 9. It isn't a do or do not commandment. It's kind of a statement, and we'll see that as we go through this. So another thing that we talked about last week was that God loves to reward those who seek after him with a good heart. And he hides many things, and he hides them in the text of the Bible. You have to ask the right questions and think about those things, and often that requires God to bring that to your attention when you're keeping along, and you'll say, boy, I don't remember hearing this before. I don't remember thinking about this before. Why is this here? Why is it included in the text? And so those kind of questions can come to mind, and those are your opportunities to dig deeper into the Bible and find out more about what it has to offer you. And that's very true about the 10 Commandments. We've looked at the different structures that people have found that are built into the 10 Commandments. And when they're numbered correctly, we can see more stuff by looking at that. But if you have them numbered incorrectly, or if you've got them on the wrong tablet, that messes up that internal hiddenness that God has put in there. And so we saw that one tablet relates to God, and that those are basically the first 5 commandments. And the other tablet relates to our relationship with mankind. And so, as we saw before, and as Jesus said himself, there are 2 parts to the 10 commandments. There's the love your God 5, and he summarized a verse in Deuteronomy 6:45 when he talked about that. And it says that is the first commandment, is what he calls it. And then he says the second commandment is love your neighbor, and that's actually from a verse in Leviticus. So in both cases, when he's answering that question, from the rabbi or the scribe, maybe it was the scribe. He uses a verse from the Old Testament Torah, but in different places. One comes from Deuteronomy, one comes from Leviticus. And so he says these two verses summarize all of the law and the prophets, is what he says. So we can see that he sees that there is that structure in there, that the commandments are broken down into two tablets, one being the love your God and one being love your neighbor. And so we see that Jesus recognized that there is that structure within it. And so the first commandment is different from the others. And we saw that last week. We talked about a bit about that, and we'll talk some more about that. And it's the commandment that isn't a do or do not commandment. It is, it starts out by saying, I am Yahweh your God. So it doesn't sound like it's even a commandment. Nonetheless, it is. And to understand that better, we need to understand that commandment is kind of a word that confuses us sometimes. We think of it as laws, like the written laws that we have. But they are instructions. They are words from God. We should think of them as a more general thing. When you study the law, motor vehicle law, for example, it says, do not exceed the speed limit. We don't try to study that to get any deeper meaning from that. We know there isn't any deeper meaning from that. It's just a law. And so the Ten Commandments are not like that. They are things that have deeper meaning to that. And we saw last week how Jesus talked about murder not being just the killing of a body, but the hating of someone in yourself, despising them, and thinking less of them. So the Ten Commandments are different from laws that we're familiar with, and they are something that are supposed to be kind of the worst case example of how you could break that law. But if you dig deeper into it, you find that there's a lot more to it. And so we'll be looking at, for the rest of this study, we're going to be looking at one thing that we saw and mentioned last week, which was the tablet-to-tablet relationships. So long ago, back in Jesus' time, we know that they knew that because there was a rabbi who already knew that. And he didn't say he discovered it. He said that he had known that and was using that to make another point that he was doing. So he was using that as a building block for something else. So it was known at that time and before that time that there was this relationship. And this relationship is there's something in common between the first commandment and the sixth commandment. So that's the top one on each of the two tablets. And the second one on each of the two tablets also has something in common. And these common things that they have help you to understand the foundational principles that guide both of them. And so from that principle, you can learn quite a bit more about what those commandments are. And that's what Jesus had actually done when he talked about murder being in the heart and not being an act of a physical act. So we're going to dig into those sorts of things here in the study. And this is the slide that we had last week, and we talked about. And so there's that relationship, the five commandments on one tablet, five commandments on the other tablet. And in order, they all have something in common. And we'll see that as I explain that. And we'll especially see that with the second one, number 2 and number 7, because that one's kind of an obvious one to look at. Some of the others are a lot harder to see, but the one that we'll do today, the first one, and maybe we'll even touch on the second one a little bit, you'll see how those fit together that way. So there is this relationship that was found long ago. So these are principles. These are 5 principles that are kind of the guiding principles for the 10 commandments. And so we're going to start with the first of these principles. And we ask the question, what's the common principle between these 2 commandments? So the first commandment says, I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the one that doesn't even sound like a commandment. And the 6th commandment, which says, you shall not murder. And so we ask ourselves, what's common here? And at first, it doesn't seem like there's really anything common. The first one seems to be an introduction. It doesn't seem to be anything that would tell you to do or not do anything. But it's when you look at what's being said here, there's something that's actually related. It's like an introduction, and it is. God is saying, you heard about me from Moses, because Moses had told him before about Yahweh. And he's saying here, you heard about me from Moses. I really do exist. I am here. I exist. And more than that, he goes on to say that I do things. I have done something good for you. And so he's a God who exists, and he's a God who does things. And that's God's purpose in introducing himself, is to make it clear that he is real and that he does stuff. He interacts with the world and makes things happen according to his will. And so we have that as kind of a basis to understand the first commandment. And when we look at the sixth commandment, that kind of gives us an idea of what the commonality is, because the sixth commandment is about ending existence, ending life, stopping action of a person. So when we see it, we can see it, yeah, okay, there is a little bit of something that is common to there. It's sort of about not ending the existence of someone. And so it seems at first step here that what we're talking about, you shall not end existence, is really what the common principle is for both of these commandments. But that gives us an odd question. It leads us to the idea of, can you end the existence of God? Can you murder God? Well, of course you can't murder God. But that leads us to another understanding. We've seen before many times that the Bible is, or the law is spiritual, and that's actually spelled out in Romans 7:14, where Paul says, we know the law is spiritual, and its purpose is to change you. And that's what I talked about earlier, is the idea behind the law is not to be rules, it's to be something that will change you and change the way you think about things and make you into a different person. And that was the goal of it all along. And so that's why it's different from motor vehicle laws, for example. They aren't meant to so much change you as to set standards for your conduct. But the idea behind the law of God is to make a different person out of you. And so we saw that idea that the law is spiritual. And so if we apply that to this, we begin to ask the question of what is spiritual murder? What is spiritually ending the existence of someone? And that leads us to something that Jesus said that we talked about last week, and we'll bring up these verses again. And this comes from Matthew 5:21 through 22. And he says, "You have heard that it was said to the ancients, 'Do not murder, and whoever murders is condemned to judgment.' But I am saying to you, that everyone who will be angry against his brother without cause is condemned before the judge. And everyone who will say to his brother, 'I spit on you,' is condemned before the assembly. And whoever will say, 'You fool,' is condemned to the Gehenna of fire." So Jesus right there is saying, you heard from the ancients about do not murder. That's that commandment, the sixth commandment. And he says, but I'm saying to you that there is more to that. And there were people in Jesus' time who understood that, certainly scribes and Pharisees. Whether the regular people knew it, I don't know. But he is saying the same thing as what we're saying here, is that it's a spiritual thing. It's what you do inside of you, how you look at other people. And so he's saying it's what is inside of you that matters. And with that, we understand that we can kill people inside of us without killing them physically. And that's kind of the key to this. You can diminish them within yourself. You can end their existence so that they are unimportant to you. They are nothing to you. And you can do that inside of yourself without ever doing any injury to them, any physical injury to them. Now, of course, that changes your whole outlook towards that person or persons that you've done that to. And so what Jesus is saying, and really he's only saying what the Ten Commandments say, what the Sixth Commandment says, is he's saying, don't diminish the value of people inside of yourself. And we know that the result of that can be a bad thing. If you do that within yourself, the result of that can be that you will do it physically as well. So now some people think that Jesus was adding to the law here, and I just kind of made the point, so I'll just reiterate a little bit. He wasn't changing the law. And it's important to understand this as a general concept about everything that Jesus said. He cannot change the law. He is under the law. There's a verse that says that he's under the law, which means that he needs to obey the law. He can't add to it. He can't subtract from it. He can talk about how the law is going to change in the future, and he does do that. But he can't actually do those things because it's required of him to also observe the law. And so what he's not adding to the law, he's simply explaining what was already in the Sixth Commandment, although not everyone probably had understood that depth to it. So now this leads us on to this idea of the difference between spiritual killing and physical killing. And so Jesus' words are equating to the murder commandment of physical killing, but he's saying that this is a murder that has no physical effect. It happens inside of you. And so you diminish a person so they are nothing to you and have no value to you. And so that helps us to understand how God thinks of murder, how he defines the word murder. And it isn't about what you've done physically. It's always been about what you've done to a person or persons inside of yourself. And so if you've diminished the value of a particular person or maybe a group of people or some class of people, so much so that you would really physically kill them or even think about killing them, but maybe you wouldn't actually do that because you know that would get you in trouble. That's the same problem as murder, when you've diminished the value of someone to that point. And we know that we think of murder that way sometimes. Even we have expressions like "you are dead to me," and of course we aren't talking about physically dead. We're talking about you have no value to me. What you've done has offended me so much that you don't mean anything to me. And so we have other expressions that are like that, where we show that we have diminished the value of people, or we're telling them that they mean nothing to us anymore. And so that's the danger that you can get into here when you diminish the value of somebody or a group of people, is that you can think of them so little that they mean nothing to you. And God doesn't want that. God wants you to love everyone, and all of us to love everyone with the same kind of love that he loves. And so that helps us to understand the sixth commandment, really. And it comes down to, don't diminish the value of someone within yourself. And if you don't do it internally, you won't do it externally. And so that's really where the sixth commandment is coming from, is that idea of reducing someone within yourself so much that they have no meaning to you, or less meaning that you would actually do or say evil things to them. So that leads us to a much better understanding of the murder commandment there. And so we get the underlying principle from that, and that is, do not diminish the other person inside of yourself. Now, that could be a person or it could be God. And so we can apply this back to the first commandment, and we can see that it's going to help us clarify our understanding of the first commandment. And one of the ways that we're to see that is some of the groups of people that the Bible speaks about as being people who offend God deeply are people like sorcerers. And so because we understand now that the first commandment is about diminishing God within ourselves, we can understand how these people are an offense to God. And so a sorcerer, now what exactly is a sorcerer as God sees it? And so a sorcerer is a person who believes that he has some ability or some knowledge that gives him control over nature. And so a sorcerer believes that he has a spell or an incantation that he can say that's going to make something happen. And so when you've done that, when you have that attitude toward doing things, you have diminished God inside of yourself. You are saying, I can do these things and God can't stop me. I have this power. And to say that, you may not say that verbally within yourself, but that's what your actions are showing. That's what your mentality is. And so with this thought process in mind, you've believe that you have some control within yourself because you know magic words or whatever it is. And you've reduced God down to the point where he can't do anything to stop you. But God says that he is always in control, and we can do nothing without him. And so there's that, when you've diminished God to that point where you think that you can do things without God, then you have become a person, a sorcerer, or you've become one of the other things that the Bible talks about. So that's a harder way for us to understand it. But when you diminish God that way within yourself, you start to think of yourself as being able to do things or get away with things that God doesn't approve of. And we're going to talk about some more of those things. We talked about sorcerers. The next one we're going to talk about that the Bible talks about as well is diviners, divination. And so the following verse is going to help us to understand divination. And he says, this is for 1 Samuel 15. It says, for rebellion is as the sin of divination. So he's saying that rebellion is similar to divination. There's something in common between those two. And so rebellion is the rejection of what God has said. If you remember the circumstances in that 1 Samuel verse, it's Samuel talking to King Saul, who has decided to do what he wants instead of what God wants. And so he's saying to Saul, this rebellion is just like divination. And so you've reduced, so what Saul had done is he had reduced the value of God within himself to the point where he felt that he could do whatever he wanted instead of doing what God wanted. I hope you can see how that diminishment, that reduction in the value or the existence of God is the cause for you to do things like divination here. So rebellion is rejection of what God has said and accepting your own words in place of his. So you've diminished God to the point where it seems okay that you should be able to do whatever you want and not what he asked you to do. So we covered sorcerers and diviners. There's another group that's also mentioned frequently, and that's mediums. And these are people who act as intermediaries between the living and the dead. Some of them believe they can call up the dead. Some believe they can talk to the dead. And so the problem here, again, is this diminishment of God, thinking that you can do things that God doesn't want you to do. And so going against his will again. So the problem here is that you're looking to the dead for answers when God is the only one who knows the answers. And so that it was exactly the same thing with God, or with Saul, when he went to the medium and asked her to bring up Samuel. He wasn't getting an answer from God, and sometimes we don't get answers from God on the questions that we have. Sometimes we just walk in faith, and that's a big part of how our lives are constructed, is that we do walk in faith on most things, not knowing the answers. But he wanted to know the answer, and he wanted to know what he should do. And because God wasn't giving him the answer, he decided to go around God and to go to a medium instead. So that's the problem here, is going around God when God has said no. So Saul, this verse comes from 1 Chronicles 10. It says, "So Saul died for his trespass, which he committed against the Lord, because of the word of the Lord, which he did not keep, and also because he asked counsel of a medium, making inquiry of it, and did not inquire of the Lord. Therefore he killed him and turned the kingdom to David, to the son of Jesse." So Saul lost his kingdom for one of the things was the fact that he didn't get an answer from God, and he decided to go to a medium and ask her, and didn't wait for God to give him an answer. So that's kind of the big idea behind mediums, is that you're using a medium as a way to get around what God has said, I don't want to reveal to you, or I don't want you to know. And so we see that in these three things, we see this kind of common idea of rejecting God and trying to go around God, or trying to find some sort of way to get what we want anyway, or believing that we have some sort of power to do it anyway. And rejecting God. And we've rejected God because we've diminished the value of God inside of ourselves. So you can see that there's some similarity between all of these in that way, is that they approach the problem in different ways, but the problem is really that they've diminished the value of God, and so they're going to some other source to get information, or to achieve their goals. So there's another verse that talks about that too, and this is from Isaiah 8, and this one says, consult the mediums, and when they say to you, consult the mediums and the spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people consult their God? So there's the key verse again. If you have questions for that you want answers to, or you'd like to have answers to, consult God. Don't go to these other people. Don't go around God if God won't tell you the answers to the things that you want. And so in that, we see all of these things have that same kind of common idea of rejecting what God is doing and substituting what we want to do instead of it. And we've done that because we've diminished God. Okay, now the Bible talks about many other groups like that. I'm just going to put them into an others group here. And one of the verses that lists a whole bunch of them comes from Deuteronomy 18:10-12. And there it says, "There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord." And if you look at that verse in a bunch of different translations, and I did that, you'll see that a whole bunch of different words are used instead of the words. This one is from NASB, I believe. And there's a bunch of different words are used. You see enchanters, or soothsayers, or fortune tellers. Observers of clouds is one of them. And this idea of making his son or daughter pass through the fire, some of them think of that as using fire to purge something from somebody. Some of them think that it's actually a sacrifice by fire. So the problem here is that this was written a long, long time ago, and a lot of those practices don't exist, or certainly don't exist in the same form in today. And so we don't have a word to describe them. So these translators are trying to find words to match up with what they understand, and their understanding of what some of these practices were back in the old time isn't clear, because nobody has done those things for thousands of years. And so the words are not clear, and so they're kind of doing their best to bring that into our time. But we need to understand that it's not those practices that are the problem. It isn't the technique, even though we don't understand how they did these things, or what was all involved in this passing your son or daughter through the fire. The technique isn't what is the important thing here. The problem is a heart that is seeking answers elsewhere than God. And so God hasn't given them what they want, and so they're going around God. They're doing something else to try and achieve what they want to achieve. And we, I think, understand that if God doesn't give us the answer, he has a reason for that. And sometimes he wants us just to be people of faith, people who are willing to walk and let him do his thing, and not constantly desiring to know the future, not constantly trying to make things happen in the future to work out the way we want them to work out. And so that's kind of a key understanding for us, is that we need to let God do it. But sometimes God does give us information, and we have prophecy in the Bible for that purpose. He talks about things that are going to happen in the future, and defines himself as a person who knows all of the future. So sometimes God gives us the answers that we seek, sometimes he doesn't. And if he doesn't, we need to be content with that. But that's a difficult thing to do. That's not our nature. Our nature is to try and get in there and grab the steering wheel and make it happen the way we want it to happen. But we need to step back and let God do his thing. So with that long list there, and not even knowing what some of those things are that they did at that time, and therefore not even having a word in our language that properly describes it, we can say that if that list was made now in our time, it would be a little different list. We would be listing things like astrologers. Those are people who try to look at the planets and understand the meaning of things according to the planets. And horoscopes are very similar. Those are based on the 12 breakdown of the year astrologically. And so they try to determine your future from that and predict things from that. Tarot cards are a little different. They didn't have cards back in the time that this was written, but the same principle is there. You're trying to find out an answer to a question. You're trying to find out the future based on these cards. Palm readers and readers of other things are also in the same category. They are people that you're trying to use to find out things that God hasn't revealed to you, has chosen not to reveal to you. And so there's lots of other things that we do in our time that are the same thing as these. And we understand them not because of the practice. The Bible doesn't say don't follow horoscopes, because the horoscopes didn't exist back then. It says don't diminish God so much that you try to go around him, that you try to work out your plan and make it happen your way. Instead, let God do his work, and don't diminish him that way within yourself. So I hope you understand that the foundation for all of these things that the Bible talks about, that God detests, is really coming from diminishing God so much that you would think that it's somehow acceptable to try to work around him or do your own thing. And we do that in many ways. We diminish God within ourselves in ways that we don't even realize, I think, sometimes. And I've put a couple images here. One is that one we've talked about before about Jesus with the superheroes. God is not like a superhero in any way, shape, or form. Those superheroes are humans. They live, they die. God is not like that. God exists, and Jesus is not like them either. So we need to never be confusing Jesus with a cartoon character and somehow thinking that they're equivalent in any way. There's no equivalence there at all. He is real, and he is all powerful. And we do the same thing, although we don't think about it, with the birth of Jesus. If we get too focused on that is not what Jesus was. He didn't come to earth to be born. He came to earth to live a perfect life and be killed for that, and to be our atonement for that. That's what he came here to do. And yes, he came as a real born human being, but that's not what he was about. And if you continue to see him as being just a baby in the manger, you diminished him, or you may have diminished him. I don't want to judge anybody on that one, because these are matters of the heart. Of course, the Bible says these verses, and we read these verses, and there's much to be learned from them. We've studied them in the past. But your heart can become different, and it becomes a heart that thinks of Jesus as being something small, like a baby, when he wasn't. He was really a full-grown God-man who was here to bring God to us. So he's much, much more than a baby. Okay. So I'm going to push on a little bit more here. We'll finish this, and we'll just touch on the second principle and get you started on that one, and then you can think about that. So summarizing what we've talked about here, we know that we're not supposed to diminish God or other people in our hearts, but it's so easy to do that. Boy, the world teaches us to do that all the time, to treat other people as being less, to put them in their place with some good words, things like that. The world teaches us bad things all the time if we listen to that, and we shouldn't, of course, ever do that. And so we can do these things so easily without even thinking about that. And we've seen examples of that. We think that we're trying to do something that's good, and in fact, we're doing something that's wrong. And we also saw in here when we're studying this that Jesus said that murder included things like hatred and despising and disgust. And that goes along with arrogance and condescension and all those bad ideas that we use to make ourselves think that we are better than people, better than other people. And that should never be a Christian's thought process about anyone. But there are people in our lives, there are people in my life that really make it a struggle that way. Some of those people do things that are just so amazingly ridiculous that you can't believe that they're doing it. And then comes the temptation to think that you're somehow better. And so we need to be careful with all of these things, despising people and being disgusted with people. And so we also saw that the sorcerers and mediums and all those group of people fit into the 10 Commandments. They fit into the first commandment. So if you had ever wondered in the past why the 10 Commandments doesn't say you shall not go to a sorcerer, it does, but in a deeper way. You have to look for it to find it. It isn't written in the text. The text is really, in most cases, about the worst case scenario, like murder is the worst case thing you can do when you've diminished a person. And so they're worst case examples. You can look at it at the 10 Commandments that way. And so it isn't like a science book that is an inch thick and you can have to read through it and understand all of it. It is something that you can learn if you go into it and find it. And this is where sorcerers and mediums go. They fit under the first commandment. So we've also seen that you can try to bypass God's limits. And when you do that, without realizing it, you've diminished God in yourself. You've reduced his value to you such that you think that you need to work around him. He's stopping you from doing what you want to do, getting what you want to get. And we need to be careful with that too. And we can do that so unconsciously. It's so easy to do that. We saw examples of using the dead to get answers, using the stars to get answered, cars to get an answer. And there's all sorts of other techniques, reading tea leaves, believe it or not. Various kinds of omens like that. So we can fall into this trap of trying to find a way to gain knowledge about the future or gain knowledge about something else. And because we think that's so important to us, we just have to have that. But instead, we need to be trusting that God knows what's going on and let him do his thing. And so we also saw, and this is most important, is that the means doesn't matter so much. It's really about what's in your heart. And what's in, if your heart is bad, of course, that tends to show out in you doing bad things. But it's really, the source of that is from the heart. And if your heart is wrong, if you've diminished God or people so much that you're condescending towards them, if you're treating God like he's somebody you can bypass, then that's a thing of the heart. And it may not show in anything you've done, but it's still a problem in your heart. So, and we know that we diminish God inside of us, of course, by trying to control what God controls. If we think that we somehow have control of nature, we can somehow guarantee the outcome of things. That isn't true. God is a player in all of this stuff, and God determines things. He has his plan. His plan is going to come out the way he wants it to come out. So we've learned all of these things here by finding out the deeper principle here. And the deeper principle is do not diminish people and do not diminish God to any degree, because that wrecks you inside. It does damage to you and your outlook on life as well. So these are all the things we've picked up by understanding this, I hope. And so now we're going to just touch a little bit on the second principle. So this would be the second commandment and the seventh commandment. And so I'm going to start with the question here of introducing the verses and asking the common principle. And then you can think about that during the week, and we'll start up again here and go through that some more. So the second commandment is a long one. It says, "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments." So that's the second commandment. The seventh commandment is much shorter. It says, "You shall not commit adultery." So during the week, I want you to think about this and ask yourself, how are these two related? What's the common thing between this idea of you shall have no other gods before me and you shall not commit adultery? So that's where I'm going to leave it for this week, and we'll continue on with this next week.